With over 8,000 animals at the one show, it's easy to find your happy place. Pre-purchase your tickets now and save.
All my clothes are starting to not fit anymore. Losing so much weight so quick is like you can't top that.
Pilot's Metabolic Reset program pairs daily treatment that mimics hunger hormones to lower your appetite. By fostering a healthier metabolic rate over time, your body will naturally readjust to a lower set point for your appetite for long-term results.
أهلا وسهلا
Start your
فيكم.
30-day trial today at pilot.com.
والله كلكم منيح سامعيني، بس خليني أتأكد إذا سامعيني. عندنا نقل مباشر كتير مهم لمايكل بار فايس تشير لجيروم باور. هو هيدي المقابلة اليوم الخطاب خاص بأمور فايس تشير لجيروم باور. لذلك هيدي المقابلة اليوم كتير مهم شو بدي يقول. ما قلت قبل البيتكوين حاليا بهالمرحلة هون كتير مهم نكسرها، ما نكسرها. إذا كسرنا هالمرحلة اللي نحن فيها هون هبوطا نكون عملنا هون كتير مهم نكسرها، نكون منا لور لو بدنا نضلنا على الهاير لو هبوطا نكون هذا أهم شيء. ولكن نشوف شو بده يقول اليوم بعد دقيقتين تقريبا على كلامه. بعدها نسبة رفع الفايدة 77%، 70%، 5%. السوق رجع شوي للخوف. خلينا نشوف شو بده يقول. السوق رجع شوي للخوف. الصوت في صدى. اعطوني لحظة بس. السوق رجع شوي للخوف. الصوت في صدى. لحظة بس. اعطوني لحظة. السوق رجع شوي للخوف. الصوت في صدى. لحظة بس. اعطوني لحظة. السوق رجع شوي للخوف. الصوت في صدى. لحظة بس. اعطوني لحظة. السوق رجع شوي للخوف. الصوت كيف صار؟ الصوت كيف صار؟ اعطيني ثواني. 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 الصوت كيف صار؟
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Anna Geltine, and I am a fellow here at the Peterson. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Anna Geltine. It is my fellow here at the Peterson pleasure and privilege to welcome Michael Barr. My few words about him in a moment. Peterson and Michael Barr. My few words about him in a moment. And to talk about a very timely is the global economy. On March 23rd and 24th, here at Pearson, we'll be convening economists and policymakers some of whom are surely economists.
كيف الصوت هلا؟
Evolution of the international monetary system and the dollar's dominance and the
مش
role of
الحال؟
exchange rate regimes in shaping the world economy. Then on March 28th, we will release the Institute's Global Economic Prospects.
Okay.
This is our semi-annual outlook for the U.S. and global economies. You want to know what the prospects are? Tune in on
أهلا
March
وسهلا
28th.
بالجميع.
And then, of course, April 10th, 14th, after the cherry blossoms.
هاي عم بتقول عندهم شو عندهم أمور حاليا عم يعملوها. نحن بيهمنا كلمة بار أكتر. شو بده يقول بار؟
Bankers and finance officials from around the world. But first, we have central bankers and finance officials right here, right now. Michael Barr took office as the vice chair for supervision last summer in July.
اوكي يلا بس عم بفتحها.
He had 3 chairs by my count. He was the Joan and Sanford Weill Dean of the Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy at the University of Michigan, the Frank Murphy Collegiate Professor of Public Policy, also at Michigan, and the
عم بتعرف عنه من هو جيمس بار.
Professor of Law at the University of Michigan Law School. He founded the Center for Finance Law and Policy in the International Transactions Clinic and Detroit Neighborhood Entrepreneurs Project, which actually brings me to
محمد معدل البطالة المضبوط رح يطلع بكرة. اليوم طلع بس بعتقد اللي بيطلعوا عليه أكثر هو بكرة أو نهار الجمعة.
Financial inclusion. I mean, some of the first stuff I've read about the Community Reinvestment Act, some of the most lucid and compelling, many moons ago.
ما في شيء هلا عم بتعرف عنه. بتمنى تحطوا تعملوا لايك وسبسكرايب لحتى العالم تعرف انه نحن لايف. اذا بتعملوا معروف بكون ممنونكم.
Was Michael's piece that really seriously considered the legitimacy and efficacy of the Basel process. He is, of course, right now the author of a textbook that many dozens of excited students watching this online, hello students, are devouring every Tuesday and Thursday. Now, he has, of course, had prior tours of public service at the U.S. Treasury. This is, I think, your 3rd, right, in the government. 2 tours at the Treasury, and then now at the Fed, which is okay. And then if you count your Supreme Court clerkship, that's number 4 with Justice Souter. Michael, it's my great pleasure and privilege to welcome you to Pearson, and I look forward to hearing your insights on
خلينا نشوف شو في. أهلا بطارق.
grammatical and policy position. Thank you so much. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks very much, Anna, and thanks to the Peterson Institute for
ركز شوف شو بده يقول.
The conversation. I'm going to give some formal remarks and then we'll have a chance for some Q&A.
بده يحكي كلمات.
I'm here today to discuss what we have learned from the recent turmoil in the crypto sector and what role supervision and regulation should play in helping banks manage their engagement with the sector and the innovative technologies that support it.
شفنا مشاكل كبيرة بالكريبتو مؤخرا وكيف فينا نحمي البنوك من تعاطيهم معهم.
And we need to be careful lest regulation lock in the power of incumbents or stifle innovation.
لازم تكون قوانين ما توقف التطوير. ولكن لازم نحط قوانين ونعطي وضوح للبنوك.
I'll wrap up by sharing some thoughts on stablecoins. It isn't hard to find evidence for the need to discuss crypto, but let me start with a recent personal experience. Last month, I visited the Mississippi Delta to talk about financial inclusion and community development. And I spent a morning talking with a group of college students. When I asked, it turned out that most of the students I met owned some crypto assets. This surprised me because in my experience as a professor, most college students are usually strapped for cash. What didn't surprise me is that many of those
كان
who
عم
said
يعمل
they owned
مقابلة
crypto assets
بميسيسيبي
also
ولاحظ
said that
كثير
they
من
had lost money,
التلاميذ عم
and they
بيحملوا
weren't very happy
كريبتو.
about that. It was a reminder to me that crypto assets aren't just held by people with ample money for speculation.
قال
A
صار
sake of
عنده وضوح إنه
Americans, many of
الكريبتو
them
مش
with
بس
limited
محمول من على
savings,
العالم اللي
say
عندها
they have
عندها
owned some
أموال.
form of crypto. The problems that have come to light in the crypto sector over the past year may
المشاكل
have
اللي شفناها
affected a large
بآخر سنة
segment of the public. When
بتأثر
I
على
think about
الكل.
how to approach crypto assets, the technology behind them, and the interaction between the crypto sector and the traditional financial system, I find it helpful to place recent innovations in historical context. Innovation in financial
التعامل
markets has
بين
long raised
الأسواق
questions about
التقليدية
the appropriate role of
الأموال
regulation.
التقليدية مع الكريبتو
Of
كان فيها
particular
مشاكل
concern is how the
مؤخرا
regulatory
بس لازم لنا
framework
قوانين
can serve
لنقدر
both to encourage innovation and to support the
لنساعد
safety and
التطور
soundness of
ونحمي
financial
المستثمر بنفس
institutions
الوقت.
and broader financial stability. Just as important is the need to protect the public from fraud and other abusive behavior. The challenge here begins with a mismatch in timing. Innovation often comes quickly, but it takes time for consumers to become aware that they could both gain and lose money on new financial products. It may take time for market participants to understand attendant risks and come up with tools to manage them.
لازم العالم يعرفوا المخاطر ولازم نعمل أمور لنقدر نحد من هالمخاطر. ما بدنا نزيد من القوانين يكون كتير القوانين لحتى نوقف التطور.
Long before crypto became an issue for regulation and public policy, I was grappling with how to think about the cycle of innovation in the context of the global financial crisis. New products often develop slowly at first, while market participants are
عادة
unsure of their
تاريخيا
value or
كنا
risks.
نحن نلاقي صعوبة
But excitement and
مع أمور
enthusiasm can then
التكنولوجية
lead to rapid growth, and new
حتى ما
products
نوقف
flood
من
the
التطوير
market as
بنفس
a
الوقت
result.
نعمل قوانين نحمي المستهلك.
Participants assume too quickly that they know how the new products work, and novel products can appear both safe and lucrative,
حتى تكون
particularly if they have not
آمنة
been tested
ومربحة
through bouts of market stress. The
بغض
innovation
النظر
cycle
من
then
تقلبات
turns
الأسواق.
when this mismatch between perceived understanding of risk and actual underlying risk becomes apparent. Back then, I was talking about some of the causes and consequences of the global financial crisis. At that time, new types of financial products had become so intertwined with the banking and broader financial system that the turn in the innovation cycle resulted in devastating consequences for homeowners, workers, businesses, and the economy. Today, while the crypto asset sector is more nascent and less pervasive, the questions about how new financial products will affect the public, the economy, and financial stability
عم
are
بخبرنا إنه
similar.
الأمور
Innovation surges ahead and regulation follows, trying to
التطور
balance
بيسبق
benefits
وبيرجع
and
لقوانين
risks.
بتلحقه لتحد
Before
من
I get into how we're
المخاطر.
responding to developments in the crypto sector in our approach to supervision and regulation, I want to recognize the potential public benefits of the technologies
وقت
underlying
نعرف
crypto
فوائد
assets. It is often argued that these technologies will have extensive
للمستخدم
beneficial application
ساعتها
beyond the
بنعرف
crypto assets themselves.
ساعتها
The
بنعرف
payment
نفتح
system is
القوانين
critical to everyday
وحتى ما نوقف من
Americans.
التطور.
It is highly resilient, but also can be slow and expensive. This is particularly true with respect to cross-border payments. The technology underlying
شيء
crypto
كتير منيح
assets,
خاصة
including
بالمدفوعات
that which
اللي
enables
بين
programmability,
البلدان. هذا
could bring new
كتير مهمة
functionality or
بالكريبتو.
efficiencies to payment systems. Proponents also claim that distributed ledger technology, encryption, and new ways of validating transactions
وطرق
could be used to facilitate faster
الانكريبشن
reconciliation,
والطريقة اللي
clearing,
كيف
and
بيتم
settlement,
التدقيق
and reduce costs for a
بالمعاملات
variety of traditional
كتير
asset
مهمة بالكريبتو.
transactions, including, for example, by linking securities and cash markets in ways that are more difficult to achieve under our current financial infrastructure.
عنده أمور هلأ حاليا سياسة الوضع
certain
المالي أو الأمور المالية اللي عينيها ما بتعملها موجودة بالكريبتو.
Such use of the
إيجابي
technology
لهلا.
could lead to potential operational efficiencies and reduced costs. The Federal Reserve has dedicated considerable resources to exploring and understanding these technologies
الاحتياط
and their potential
الفيدرالي
benefits, as
عم
well as the
يستثمر
risks
ليفهم أكثر
associated with these
هالأمور
innovations.
وكيف
In
يكفي
contrast to the
التطور.
potential benefits of these technologies, there is the actual experience of the many people whose hope and enthusiasm for crypto assets have met with disappointment and sometimes devastating loss. Robert Shiller describes how Bitcoin is a prime example of what he calls a contagious economic narrative. The story of Bitcoin's value proposition taps into the fears of government control and with the promise that
البيتكوين
through
تعمل
superior
مخاوف لسيطرة
technology, a
الدولة
new
لأنه
product can
باللامركزية
yield
تبعها.
untold riches. But when it comes to certain crypto assets, some of which have no intrinsic value beyond the faith of
بس
their
في
owners,
كثير
the
عملات
law of
رقمية ما لها
gravity will
قيمة
eventually
أبدا،
apply, as it did with the tulip frenzy in Holland more than 400 years ago. Experience has shown that crypto assets can face the same fundamental liquidity and credit risks as traditional assets and can be highly correlated
فيهم
with
مخاطر.
other
الكريبتو فيهم
traditional risks,
مخاطر كثيرة
rather than
مثل
being
غير
hedges against such risks.
مثل غير أمور.
While purveyors of crypto assets have represented to customers that they are protected through the decentralized nature of the underlying
بالرغم من إنه
technology,
كثير عالم
customers are often at a
بيقولوا
greater risk
للمستخدم إنه
because
هن
those
لا
purveyors find
مركزية
ways to
وبيحمون،
function
بس في
outside of a
كثير
robust
مخاطر وكثير
supervisory
منهم
and
ما لهم
regulatory
عازة.
system. In the absence of regulatory compliance, customers don't have the information they need to assess and mitigate their risks. Investors do not have the structural protections they have relied on for so many decades.
المستثمرين ما عندهم
As a
الحمايات مثل
result,
بالأسواق
many have been
التقليدية.
victims of classic cases of fraud and abuse.
بهالسبب كثير منهم خسروا أموال بسبب التنصيب
under a high-tech
والكذب
agreement.
وهالأمور.
Moreover, while crypto assets are hyped as decentralized, there has been an emergence of new, quite centralized intermediaries
بالرغم من إنه
that are either
الكريبتو
not
بيقولوا
subject to or
عنه
not
لا
compliant
مركزي،
with
بس عم
appropriate
نشوف
regulation
كثير
and supervision,
أمور
which has
مركزية بعالم
perpetuated harm to
الكريبتو، بس ما
consumers.
ما بيحكوا
Complicating
عنهم.
matters further, these entities often seek out jurisdictions with loose or less developed legal and regulatory frameworks for financial activities. And the lack of consolidated home country supervision and coordination with host country supervisors rekindles the kind of abuses that bank regulators long ago quashed. While such cross-jurisdictional regulatory arbitrage is not new, the digital nature of these activities provides for a greater opportunity to expand the reach of such entities
بالرغم من
to
كل شيء،
customers around the world.
لأنه
For example, a prominent
الكريبتو موجود
collapse of
وين
the
ما كان
FTX
بيعطي
crypto
وصول
asset trading
لعالم
platform has
بكل
reportedly
أنحاء
wiped out the
العالم. يعني
holdings of a million people, costing them billions of dollars.
مؤخرا في خسارات
Unfortunately,
بقيمة
this is not the
مليارات
only
الدولارات
example.
صارت.
Since last summer, we saw the collapse of one crypto intermediary after another. As
شفنا
these cases
انهيارات
are
كتير
working their way
كبيرة
through the
من
bankruptcy
بآخر
courts,
سنة
we're
لهلا.
seeing indications of misuse of client funds, misrepresentations, obfuscation about the availability of deposit insurance, and potential fraud.
وتنصيب
Crypto has
كتير.
also been implicated in numerous cases of illicit financing. Crypto assets pose
وشفنا كتير
significant money laundering and
شفنا
terrorist financing
بالكريبتو
risks
تبييض
due to the
أموال كتير
synonymous actors that are
ومخاطر
parties to transactions,
مختلفة،
the ease and speed of transfer, and the general
لأنه بسبب
irrevocability of
سهولة
transactions,
نقله.
all of which make crypto assets attractive for use in money laundering and terrorist
وهالشي
financing.
بيخلي
Indeed,
الكريبتو
enforcement agencies, including the Financial
كثير من
Crimes
العالم
Enforcement Network,
بيستخدموه
the
لتبييض
Office of Foreign
الأموال
Assets
وكل
Control,
هالأمور.
and the Department of Justice
وأكثر
have taken
عملة بيتم
numerous public
استعمالها هي
enforcement
الدولار
actions
الكاش
against entities or
لتبييض
individuals
الأموال
dealing with crypto
وبالإرهاب.
assets. This kind of behavior can cause substantial harm to investors and consumers, as well as our financial system. The federal bank regulatory agencies, including the
هالأمور
Federal
بتعمل
Reserve
خطر على
Board, have a
النظام المالي
statutory
تبعنا.
responsibility to ensure that the activity of the entities we supervise is conducted in a safe
نحن
and sound manner
هدفنا
and in
نسيطر
compliance with all applicable laws.
نسيطر
While the
على
effects of the events in the crypto
أموال
sector on
العدو، ما
Federal
نخليه
Reserve
يقدر يتصرف
supervised
فيهم
banks have been
بطريقة هينة
limited
سهلة.
in the aggregate thus far. Recent experience has made it clear that crypto could pose risk to those banks. In response, we have worked with the other federal
مؤخرا
banks
شفنا
and
أن الكريبتو
regulatory
بيهدد
agencies
بعض
to
البنوك،
provide clarity and guidance on what is permissible, safe and sound,
وهلا عم
and
نشتغل
compliant with
لنشوف
anti-money
شو
laundering
كيف
and
فينا
anti-terrorist financing laws, as well as consumer
نحقق
and investor
القوانين
protections.
خاصة
And
ضد
we set out our
الإرهاب
supervisory
ونحمي
expectations for
المستخدم
banks
بلا ما
engaging with
نوقف
new product
التطور.
types and activities. As noted above, this is not just a domestic issue. We're also
هيدي
working with
المشكلة
our
مش
international
بس
counterparts to
بأمريكا، عم
minimize the
يشتغلوا
possibility of regulatory
مع
arbitrage across
مع دول
jurisdictions.
عالمية لحتى يقدروا
One
يسيطروا على
overarching
هالأمر.
principle of the Federal Reserve's financial oversight is that activities that are fundamentally the same should be regulated the same. regardless of where or how the activity
هلا عم
occurs.
نحكي انه بما انه امور ماليه لازم يكونوا القوانين هي ذات عليهم.
We have, to say the least, a somewhat complicated financial services regulatory framework in the United States. And there are several regulatory authorities with oversight of financial services activities. But we know how important it is for entities interested in providing financial services with new technologies to engage on a level playing field.
خايفين من الكريبتو.
That is why we work closely with the other bank regulatory agencies to develop a consistent
القوانين
approach.
بس لكم صراحة القوانين مهمة لازم تجي القوانين بس حسب لأي درجة بدهم يسيطروا عليها. أنا برأيي في كتير أمور لازم لها قوانين بالمجال. المنصات المركزية لازم لهم الدولارات الرقمية يعني مثل العملات الساكنة لازم لهم قوانين بس مش إنه يسيطروا على شيء. هيدي الفكرة تبعي أنا. القوانين بتجيب أموال كتير بتجيب شركات. هذا رأيي الشخصي يعني.
Meaning they can be applied in a broad range of circumstances. Given emerging interest in crypto asset activities, we have worked to provide clear and transparent guidance. Last August, we published a supervisory guidance letter for activities for banks in considering engaging in crypto-related activities. And one of the first steps is to engage in a serious conversation with their regulators.
حاليا بدنا نتابع النظام المالي التقليدي والنظام العالمي لأنه بعده هو أكبر بكثير بس مع الوقت بنصير ما نهدف بهذا الهدف يعني
They
أكيد.
need to establish that the activities are legally permissible and that there are sufficient controls in place to ensure these activities can be conducted in a safe and sound manner and in compliance with all applicable laws. Against the background of possible crimes that some crypto companies are now under investigation for, this is not a box-checking exercise. Our letter also let banks know that they're expected to notify the Federal Reserve if they intend to engage in crypto asset-related activities and to engage in a robust supervisory conversation. The letter said, in effect, don't jump in and plan to figure out risk management later. It stated that Federal Reserve supervised banking organizations should have adequate systems and controls in place to conduct crypto asset related activities in a safe and sound manner.
عم يحكي انه بده عم بيوقف البنوك من انه يدخلوا لانه ما بده اياهم يخاطروا لازم يعرفوا المخاطره قبل.
Including the turmoil I discussed earlier. On January 3rd, after learning from these developments, the board and other bank regulatory agencies issued another statement advising banks to be focused on a list of several key risks.
لا يركزوا على المخاطر تبع الكريبتو بشهر واحد طلع.
To money laundering and terrorist financing.
خاصة ضد تبييض الأموال والإرهاب.
Later in January, the board issued a policy statement making it clear to the banks we supervise that the board would apply the same permissibility standards to activities, including crypto asset-related activities, regardless of a bank's deposit insurance status. The preamble to the statement made clear that we would likely view it as unsafe and unsound for banks to directly own crypto assets on their balance sheet.
كانوا عم بيحطوا للبنوك انه ما لازم يحملوا كريبتو على البالانس شيت تبعهم يعني على السيستم تبعهم ما لازم يشتغل.
On February 23rd, we provided additional clarity about supervisory expectations through another statement issued jointly with the other bank regulatory agencies. This statement was also informed by recent supervisory experience. The statement highlighted to our supervised institutions that they need to be aware of the liquidity risks associated with certain crypto sector affiliated deposits. We always expect banks to assess and manage the liquidity risks of their funding sources. As the statement makes clear, and has been obvious throughout the last few months, crypto sector depositors may have assets that can be affected by volatility in the sector.
العالم اللي بيحملوا الكريبتو بيتأثروا بتقلبات السوق ولازم نحد من هالمخاطر.
And thus the liquidity risks of their deposits
خيي دكتور ناصر.
These liquidity concerns are particularly acute for banks that have a meaningful portion of their balance sheets funded with such deposits. Again, we took these steps to make clear that we have the same expectations for all the
شكلنا كانوا عم
institutions that we
يضغطوا على
supervise
البنوك
and which seek to engage in novel
بشكل
activities.
كتير كبير
These
كمان
expectations
الكريبتو.
are not
كلنا
new.
بنعرف هالشيء اللي
We
صار
expect
مؤخرا مع
supervised
سيلفرغيت
entities to
بسبب
ensure that they
قوانينهم.
conduct their activities
ان شاء الله
in a safe
ما
and sound manner
يلاحقوا
and in
سيجنتشر
compliance with all relevant
signature
laws,
bank.
including anti-money laundering laws. These public statements are transparent and provide the same information for everyone, including for small banks that may not have large teams of analysts assessing industry developments, large banks with more resources, and of course, the public. We plan to continue to publish guidance of this kind
بدنا
as
نضلنا
we
ما
continue
نعطي
to advance
تحذيرات
activity in the sector.
للمجتمع
In addition to
للبنوك.
sharing what we learn with the public on an ongoing basis, we're also enhancing our supervision of these
أهلا فيك
activities.
أخي.
We are creating a specialized team of experts that can help us learn from new developments and make sure we're up to date on innovation in the sector. I want to wrap up today by talking about stablecoins.
بده يحكي عن
As Chair
العملات
Powell has
المثابتة
said,
المستقرة.
stablecoins are a type of private money. And there's a long and messy history of private money in the United States that shows the need for robust regulation and oversight.
الأموال
Any
المستقرة
entity
لازم
issuing
يكون
money
في
denominated in the US
قوانين
dollar
صارمة
and
عليها.
drawing on the trust of the Federal Reserve needs to be subject to federal prudential regulation and supervision. I'm not saying anything new here. This has been our
لازم يخضع للنظام الفيدرالي.
Stablecoin issuers seek to have, but don't, some of the same characteristics as federally insured bank deposits. Stablecoin issuers represent
يلي
that their
بيطلق
liabilities
العملات
can be
الثابتة لازم
redeemed
يكون
on
عنده
demand
دعم
at par,
100%
$1 for $1.
ويخضع للقوانين
In
الفيدرالي.
fact, however, the assets backing the liability can fluctuate in value. Even if the assets backing the claim are high quality, they cannot necessarily be immediately monetized, and operational risks are quite high. As we have seen all too often, depositors sometimes want or need their money immediately, especially in times of stress.
في أيام
This
العالم بدها أموالها
mismatch
بشكل
in value
سريع.
and liquidity is the recipe for a classic bank run. Issuers are not supervised by the Fed and lack capital and liquidity as a backstop. The banks we regulate, in contrast, are well protected from bank runs through a robust array of supervisory requirements. Consider the consequences if a stablecoin not subject to appropriate supervision and regulation
إذا عملة ثابتة ما
were to be
عندها
adopted as a
عندهم
widespread
سيطرة
means of
بخلال قوانين
which some
واضحة.
stablecoin developers state as a goal. Stablecoins have the
هالشي
potential to scale quickly because of
بيعمل
network
خطورة.
effects. An unregulated, unsupervised deposit-like asset could create tremendous disruptions. Not just
عملوا
for
لهم
financial
قوانين. العالم اللي عندها
institutions,
ستيبل كوين
but for
عملات
people
ثابتة
who might
بدها
rely on
قوانين.
the
عملوا
coin
قوانين
in order to
للعملات
get wide
الثابتة بس
adoption.
مش ما
We
تحكوا
must
شيء
learn from the past to
ونضلنا
ensure that we do
بالانتظار.
not allow for new forms of unregulated private money subject to classic forms of run risk and with the associated spillovers and systemic implications for households, businesses, and the broader economy. That gets me back to the central point of my remarks, which is the need to balance innovation with safeguards. Our goal is to create guardrails while making room for innovation that can benefit consumers and the financial system more broadly.
100% كل هلا
We're
يجهزوا
working with the
للدولار
other bank
الرقمي.
regulatory
أنا
agencies
معك
to
بوافقك
consider whether
100%.
and how certain types of crypto asset activity can be conducted in a
عم
manner that
بيجهزوا
is
للسي بي
consistent
دي
with
سي.
safe and sound banking. We are also working towards providing additional clarity in our views of the risks and effective risk management practices across a range of crypto-related activity. We will continue to be transparent with the banking sector and the public about
رح
our
يضلوا
expectations.
واضح مع
We will
البنوك
also work with the other agencies
والعالم
to align our approach
وكل
to
الأمور
ensure that the same risks receive the
لحتى
same
يحد من
treatment.
المخاطرة
As we
تبعها.
continue our efforts, we will work to support innovation by establishing the guardrails essential for sustainable, safe, and transparent markets. Thank you.
خلص. أنا بوافقك دكتور ناصر. الحرب بدأت لإصدار العملات الثابتة أو بنظام الألغوريثمية. الحرب على العملات الثابتة بلشت سي بي دي سي. هدفهم مش بس هيك. هلا هون بسألوا أسئلة. إذا ملاحظين مثل ما صار بالصين السي بي دي سي بيقدروا يحطوا أول شيء بيقدروا يقولوا لكم كيف تصرفوا أموالكم بالعملة الثابتة للبنك المركزي. بيقدروا يحطوا تاريخ معين، يعني إذا ما صرفتوهم بيمنعوكم، يعني حتى يدفشوا العالم يعملوا اللي بدهم إياه. في أمور كتير فيهم يعملوها.
I wanted to start with a big-ish picture question that does come from students, and that is, would it be fair to think of this period as
ايه بيقدروا يطبقوا
analogous
قد ما
to
بدهم، ما هي
crypto's
مثل هاي
Dodd-Frank
سياستهم.
moment, right? Or sort of have the recent events that certainly inform your remarks clarified the path forward, not just for you and your colleagues, but more broadly. And you should know about Dodd-Frank having played rather an active role in that, as you suggested.
I do think this is a really critical moment for us and for the public and for Congress to
نحن بمرحلة كتير خطيرة،
and look at the risks and benefits.
ولكن بدنا نطلع من بعيد نشوف المخاطر مقابل الفوائد تبعه.
We have just gone through an experience that did not cause enormous disruption to our broader economy, but was quite disruptive to the crypto asset sector, and in a way that revealed some of the problems that people have been highlighting about the sector for a long time, like the lack of transparency, the fact that many entities engaged in this activity actively sought to avoid being supervised or regulated, the problem of fraud.
عم بيقول في مشاكل بالتنصيب، مشاكل
some of the hype associated with stable coins and with crypto asset activities more broadly sort of.
يا أخي حيدر ما تأثر السوق، كثير عالم مش عم يحضروه، ولكن ضروري نحضروا ليه؟ لأنه بفرجينا وين هن وضعهم بأوننة المجال. بدنا نعرف شو بدهم يعملوا بالمستقبل، يعني ضروري نحن نكون عم نعرف شو عم يعملوا. هو كلامه مش بقوة جيروم باول ولا جاري جانستر بتأثير على السوق، لا ما بيأثر، بيقدروا العالم مش كلها بتحضرهم، ولكن نحن كأنه متابعين بالمجال ضروري نعرف وين تفكيرهم، وين وضعهم لحد وين بدهم يعملوا القوانين وكيف عم يفكروا. هيدي ضروري نكون نحن مطلعين عليها، والقوانين جايين قلنا ايه وقلنا لا، وهو احد الاشخاص اللي بيطلع على هالامور.
As I mentioned at the end of my remarks, I think there's a critical role for Congress to play right now in establishing a framework for stablecoins. Because stablecoins in particular
عم يعملوا فريمورك يعني
pose potential for systemic risk.
للستيبل كوين، للعملات المستقرة، عم يعملوا مثل
have strong federal prudential supervision and oversight of stablecoins. They do have this ability because of network effects to scale quickly, and they are a form of private money that borrows the trust of the central bank. And I think that's absolutely critical that we get the regulatory oversight of that right.
So yet again, this gives rise to a whole bunch of fascinating questions, I'm sure, for our audience, but also for me. You mentioned the financial stability risk, particularly from
عم تسأله أنت قلت عن
both occupied on occasion.
مخاطر financial stability،
الثبات الاقتصادي. Currency boards, right? And so there are a few ways to think about this. You can draw regulatory perimeters, right? And say, look, we're going to oversee everything inside, and we feel okay about what's happening outside, either because somebody else is taking care of it or because it's not worrisome. But then there is, and I would love for you to elaborate a little bit on kind of perimeter drawing in this space, not just absolutely for stable coins, but also beyond that, and sort of the grammatical uncertainty of what crypto might, is it an adjective or is it a noun? I think it stands for a deeper classification problem, honestly. But then there's another dimension, and we might follow up on that, and that is both you and Chair Powell characterized stablecoins as private money. Well, one way to deal with
أنت وجيروم باول قلتوا العملات الثابتة أموال خاصة.
Kind of your position on public digital currency in the U.S. and beyond, I think would be really interesting to tease out in relation to the concerns about stablecoins.
Well, let me try, and I think we've got maybe three categories of questions. In the first category, it's really a question about what's inside and outside the regulatory perimeter. And as you and your students know, because you're in the middle of this now, that is a pervasive question in banking regulation, and has been throughout, throughout our history. And there's always going to be some set of activities that happen outside of whatever line you draw. And then the question is, how comfortable do you feel about that activity being outside the perimeter, and how should it be regulated if it's not? My view is not everything has to be in the banking system. It's fine for there to be
نظرتي أنا مش
market
كل شيء لازم
activities
يكون
that occur outside of banks, outside of financial
ضمن النظام
systems.
المالي. في أمور رح تكون
We still
خارج
need for
النظام
those
المالي.
kinds of activities, strong rules of the road. One of the reasons that we have the most, effective and innovative and efficient capital markets in the world is because we have really good, strict laws.
أحد الأسباب
that
عنا
enforce
أفضل
investor
الأسواق
protection,
المالية بالعالم إنه
that
عنا
enforce
قوانين صارمة
transparency, that
تفرض
enforce segregation
الشفافية،
of client assets, that have
فصل
rules
أموال
about
المستثمرين،
what kinds of entity can do what functions, that separate functions
مين
where there
بيقدر
might
يعمل
be,
شو
serious
بطريقة
conflicts
واضحة.
of interest. And so those rules have created, I think, one of the most, vibrant and efficient markets in the world.
هالقوانين عملت أحد أهم
Crypto sector is trying to
نظام
operate
الأموال
without
بالعالم.
those rules, and I think that's a significant.
عم نجرب الكريبتو
With
ندخله
respect to
بهالمجال.
stablecoins, it's in addition to the kinds of market risk that I described, there's a serious prudential risk, which is that you have an unregulated, unsupervised form of private money that then gains traction because of network effects. And
ايه بشار اكيد بالبول ماركت ما حدا بيتذكر هذا، ولكن الاسس اللي بدها تنحط هون رح تاثر. هو احد الاشخاص اللي بياثر بالقوانين اللي رح تنوضع بعالم الكريبتو. هالشيء بياثر على كل شيء قبل البول ماركت. متى ما بلش البول ماركت ما بيقعد حدا يسال، ولكن الاسس والاطر تبع القوانين رح تاثر بشكل كتير كبير. لذلك انا عم تابعه وكثير مهم انه نتابعه.
institutions offering, individual notes that people then had to go negotiate with each other about what they were really worth. Is it really worth $1 if it says it's worth $1, or because it's hard to trade in, is it worth less? And that was highly inefficient. And one of the really important innovations coming out of the Civil War from a financial perspective was the idea that we had one unit of account, one currency, and that is a much more efficient way to run an economy, and more importantly, a much more financially stable way to run an economy.
طريقة للاقتصاد اللي عم يحكي عن عملات الثابتة وعلى طرق القوانين تبعه.
That are inefficient. You can have very large forms of private money that end up being quite destabilizing. You can think of a stable coin as a completely unregulated.
شباب بتمنى تعملوا لايك على على الفيديو. بتمنى منكم إذا تعملوا لايك بكون ممنونكم.
It's quite explosive, quite potentially quite dangerous, and that's why Chair Powell has made this clear. Vice Chair Brainerd, when she was at the Fed,
لذلك كل العالم حذروا من جيروم باول وغيره. بده يكون أشخاص بسبب هالمخاطر لازم تكون عندهم credentials اللي بيعملوا.
And some decades and some incentives for the Fed dealing with access to the payment system to actually get that banknote chaos under control, right? So that hopefully we're not talking for decades.
Well, one of the nice things about, having the lessons of history is that we don't have to recreate the problems all over again that we've already solved. And so I think it's important.
100% دكتور ناصر. هن بدهم يسيطروا على الضرائب، ما بدهم الضرائب تبعهم. عم تحكي هلا عن نظام المدفوعات.
To the coin piece of stablecoin. Do you view this debate as at all related to the central bank digital currency conversation in the United States, or not so much?
I think of them as swimming in separate lanes. Okay. So we need to have, if people want to issue stable coins, we need to have strong prudential
إذا
oversight
حيلا شركة
of
بدها
activity.
تصدر
Over the people, over the
العملة
issuance of the
الثابتة،
wallets,
بدنا نعرف من هي
over
الشركة
the
كيف
structure of the
الطريقة،
mechanisms
كيف
and
الدعم
the,
تبعها.
the
أنا معه من هالناحية، العملات
whatever the
الثابتة لازم تكون
effective
واضحة
blockchain is or
والدعم
other
دولار
mechanisms
لدولار
like
لحتى
stablecoins.
ما
So all
يفوت
that
العالم
needs to be
بمتاهات
supervised
ومشاكل.
very
أنا
well.
معه
There's a
بهالمنطلق.
separate question, which is, should the Federal Reserve issue a central bank digital currency?
في
And
أمر
people
تاني
might want
هذا
that
لك.
for lots of different reasons than they want a stablecoin. I think they're functionally quite different instruments. And so we
عم
think of
يحكي عن
them
العملة
just
الثابتة
as
للبنك المركزي هون.
separate sets of issues to work on. At the Fed, we're very focused right now on research and development about central bank digital currency. We haven't made any decision about whether we think it's a good idea.
بعد ما قرروا إذا هن
We
برأيهم
made it clear that if we move
فكرة
forward
جيدة.
on a central bank
قررت
digital
وخلصته.
currency, we would ask Congress and the administration for their views, and we'd want to do it only if there was a consensus this was something that was good for the country.
Now, speaking of consensus, and going back to your point about financial stability, to what extent, what do you see as the role of the Financial Stability Oversight Council in this conversation? And I mention this both because you mentioned regulators who are not federal bank regulators.
في مقاولين مش ضمن الاحتياط الفيدرالي وثبات الوضع المالي.
And just hashing out a shared position on what legislation should be in this space.
كيف لازم تكون القوانين بهالمجال. ضينا وقت كتير مع العالم بالفاينانشال ماركت ستابيليتي، ثبات المجال المالي بعتقد.
As you mentioned, the SEC and CFTC.
صراحة في healthy أمور healthy.
We have state regulators as part of the FSOC, and so it is a really good forum for discussion of these issues and of exchange of views on them.
عم يعملوا اجتماعات كتير لهالأمور والنقاش حول الأمور.
So one is really going to your latest guidance, right? And it seems to be, and this whole idea of crypto-related activities. I mean, we're all crypto-related, to some degree. So if, for example, the business model of an institution, right, is tied in on either side of the balance sheet with
عم نحكي على الشركات إذا لهم علاقة بعالم الكريبتو.
Right? Isn't that a sort of concentrated funding business model problem? And isn't that something that should have been?
صراحة المحاور ما معها خبر الكريبتو، يعني عم تعمل أسئلة ما بعرف. هو كلامه مقبول بس هي ما بتعرف تحاول، ما معها خبر. جيبوا حدا بيفهم شوي بالعالم الكريبتو.
When you talk about guardrails, are we talking about guidance about existing guardrails?
وقت تحكي عن guardrails يعني أطر للحماية، يعني إنه هيدا هيك لازم تمشوا بهذا المجال. مثل أطر للقوانين الحماية.
Our perspective to date has been quite a lot.
رأينا اليوم كثير.
The kind of guidance that we're issuing is kind of motherhood and apple pie guidance.
الطريقة اللي عم نحن نعرض فيها كيف لازم يتصرفوا هي على أساس إنه هلا إنه كيف نحن بننصحكم بس ما عنا الأطر الأساسية بعدنا. يعني عم نحكي بشكل مجمل ضد تبييض الأموال، ضد الإرهاب، ضد الإرهاب المالي، يعني هالأمور الهروب من الضريبة. ولكن هيك عم نحدد الأسس للشركات الصغيرة.
Crypto-related companies is that the extent to which they are exposed to correlated risks was not well understood.
هلا في بعض الشركات عم تاخد مخاطر ما عارفة، وهالأمور اللي نحن بدنا نحذرهم منها. في مخاطر كتير كبيرة بالكريبتو اللي عليها بأكثر شغلة، يعني عم يحكي كيف مثلا فويجر وهول مع لونا مع FTX، يعني مشكل مع حدا بيعمل تداعيات مع غيره لأنه لهم علاقة متشبكين مع بعضهم، هيك عم يحكي.
Of deposits, and the experience of smaller institutions is that they have actually experienced that, and those liquidity risks are really meaningful. And so, in our latest guidance, we highlighted to banks the importance of taking that seriously.
عم نحكي عن السيولة مؤخرا.
Shouldn't somebody have picked that up?
Yeah, I do think if you
مع
look
البنوك
at the
لحتى يعرفوا هالمخاطر.
smaller institutions that were involved. We tend to have a
بشكرك عبد الرحمن، أهلا وسهلا فيك.
I would say light touch approach to smaller institutions, and so there's more of an impetus on them to actually be paying attention to these new and novel risks.
لازم يعرفوا الشركات المخاطر اللي عليها بالمجال ولازم يفهموها. وعم نشوف شركات كبيرة كمان لهم علاقة بهالمخاطر، ولكن هدول الشركات الكبيرة يعني نسبة للأموال اللي عندهم، السيول اللي عندهم، بياخدوا مخاطر كتير قليلة، ما بتأثر عليهم كتير.
Are exposed to the potential problems associated with some of the illicit financing activity that's been happening in the crypto space, and the need for heightened controls in that space, I think, is quite acute, and so it calls out for, again, heightened risk management, but within
عبد الرحمن إيميلي موجود تحت، ابعت لي وبنتواصل على الخاص ساعتها.
Thank you so much, and I'm
يعني في عندك عبد الرحمن بدك تتواصل معي على تويتر أو على الإيميل بالوصف.
Unfortunately, we cannot take questions from the audience online, which is rather large, as my phone tells me. But if anyone in the audience here has a question,
نشكرك دكتور ناصر.
the microphone, state your name, affiliation, and a
Buy the fear, sell the greed. اشتروا الخوف، بيعوا الطمع. 100%. هيدي سياستي أنا، حتى الDCA بعمله أنا ضمن الخوف الشديد. أنا بعمل DCA بفوت على مراحل بالخوف الشديد، وبعمل بخرج على مراحل بالطمع الشديد.
So maybe I should repeat for the online audience. Nicholas Veron at the Institute. So this policy discussion doesn't take place in an international vacuum. I'm particularly interested in your views on initiatives that have already taken place in other jurisdictions. I'm thinking in particular of the MiCA market in crypto.
سؤال مهم. عم يحكي عم يصير اجتماعات خارج الولايات المتحدة عالميا، مثلا مع الاتحاد الأوروبي، مع كل هالأمور للقوانين هتشتغلوا مع بعضكم، وشو عم يتم الحديث عن شو؟ سؤال مهم.
Thank you. It's good to see you again. If you look around the world, many countries, many jurisdictions around the world are more advanced in their regulatory frameworks than we are here in the United States.
في كتير مناطق بالعالم القوانين بلشوا قبلنا فيها ومتطورين أكثر منا فيها من ناحية الكريبتو.
The Japanese have a comprehensive framework.
اليابانية عندهم
an approach to this sector. Traditionally, in the United States, it's hard for us to come up with those types of regulatory moments. And we have an existing regulatory infrastructure that can be
أسس وأطر قوانين لكل شيء جديد، ولكن الكريبتو شوي غير أكيد. عادة بنمشي على هالأطر الفاينانشال سيستم القديم، النظام المالي القديم.
Is this new kind of product like an existing product that we develop? And in what ways can we therefore regulate it using our existing tools? And in the absence of Congress adapting a different framework,
بس
that's the
بدنا
framework we use. So when we think
في ظل
about,
انه الكونغرس ما عم
the
يطرح
banking sector, when we think about
اسس اطر
regulation
جديده،
related
نحن
to
رح
fees
نضطر
and
نضلنا
governing,
نستعمل الاطر القديمه.
you know, we now have a new type of orange. We need to have new orange regulation. We say this new orange looks a lot like the oranges that we already eat. And so we think about how to regulate it in that light and modify our rules for any different kinds of risks.
وين البيتكوين نحن عم نحضر.
And in the absence of Congress stepping in with comprehensive regulation,
ضروري ما نكسر هون هبوط.
Continue to see here in the United States.
Expanding on that very briefly,
إذا
so
كسرنا
how
هون هبوط
relevant
next area هون.
is the Basel process and FSB at the moment, right? They've both sort of provisionally said things in this space. Is it relevant? Is it, I mean, going back to your earlier work, does it frame what we do, or do we just sort of watch it out of the
الله
corner of
يعافيك
our eye
أخي.
and see if it's okay?
No, we are active participants in the Financial Stability Board and in helping to shape the global framework. So it is reflective in many ways of our views about how to think about these risks. The actions we're taking in the U.S. with respect to regulation of banks engaged in
التصرفات اللي عم نعملها من ناحية
consistent
بالأمريكا
with the principles that the Financial Stability Board
نفسها هي اللي بنستخدمها بالفاينانشال سيستم بعالم الأموال التقليدية.
process has resulted, for example, in a framework for capital treatment of crypto-related
البازل هي
activities.
طريقة بيستخدمها
That would also
لتحديد
be consistent
رؤوس
with
الأموال
our thinking
الكابيتال.
about, the approach in this area. We don't currently, to our knowledge, have any firms that we regulate that have
حاليا ما عندنا ولا شركة نحن من قوانيننا بيتعاطوا مع الكريبتو، ولكن لازم بالمستقبل نبلش.
So we don't yet have the question of how much capital they should hold.
بشكرك خير راجح.
But those larger frames are consistent with how we're thinking about risks in this area.
And your bank holding company approach and your approach to foreign bank entry and intermediate holding companies. I mean, it's sort of all on the doorstep, right?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Steve Kamen from the American Enterprise Institute. Very nice speech, Vice Chair Barr. Thank you. Nice to see you again. I was intrigued by your comment that stable coins and central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, were being treated in some sense sort of separately.
فاجأتني عبارتك وقت قلت العملات الثابتة والعملة الثابتة البنك المركزي عم تتعاطوا منه على طريقة مختلفة.
And considering that issuance of a CBDC could in principle compete with or even wipe out private stable coins.
خاصة إنه عملة ثابتة البنك المركزي يمكن تمحي كل العملات الثابتة.
In particular, I'd be interested to know what social value might a private stable coin offer relative to a CBDC?
Thanks, Steve. Good to see you. I do think, in the current environment, stable coins are mostly used by people who want to trade one cryptocurrency for another cryptocurrency in or through an intermediary in the crypto world. So the use case right now is fairly limited.
استخدام
But stable coins, as I was mentioning, could be used more broadly for payments.
العملات الثابتة فيهم يستخدموه كنظام مدفوعات. بعدين
strictly regulated at the federal level for prudential purposes. The central bank digital currency also could be used broadly on the payment system. We currently have forms of central bank digital currency today. We have reserves at banks.
العملة الثابتة للبنك المركزي يعني فيهم يستخدموها للمدفوعات ويستخدموها كثير. عندنا هلا اطر لهالامر بالنظام التقليدي يلي هي له علاقه بالفيدرال ريزيرف بانك. البنك
we don't
الفيدرالي.
have out of our current forms of digital currency and our forms of paper currency, cash. Cash is still quite important for a lot of people. I almost never use cash, but as I'm sure many people in the audience don't. But for many people, cash is still an important medium of exchange, and likely will be
في كتير عالم
in the
بعدها
future
بتستعمل
if we
الكاش.
have a freely available retail central bank digital currency. So what could central bank digital currency do? People tend to divide the kinds of activities into wholesale and retail.
العالم
On the
بيقسموا
retail
شراء
side,
هولسيل يعني بالجملة
Federal Reserve issued
وبالريتيل
a study
العالم
last
المفرق
year that
العادي.
basically said, if we think it makes sense to do further work on a retail form of central bank digital currency, the form of that would be what's called intermediated retail currency. And by intermediated, it means the central bank wouldn't run around trying to deal directly with households and businesses. Banks or potentially other institutions would be as they are today.
اوكي عم بيقول للعالم العادي العملة ثابتة البنك المركزي ما بتكون هي الرسمية، فيهم البنوك يعملوا عملات ويعطوها للمستخدمين، بس من ناحية كبيرة هي بعتقد انه بده يكون دعمها من العملة الثابتة للبنك المركزي.
People holding this form of currency instead of using deposits at a bank for their payments activities. What would that mean for the allocation of credit in our society? So there are all kinds of questions around that. And then there's another set of questions that people raise around privacy.
في أسئلة كتير عالم يسألوها عن الخصوصية مع العملة الثابتة للبنك المركزي. هذه كتير خطرة، هيدي من أخطر الأمور. يقدروا يراقبوا لكم كل شيء مع عملتهم الثابتة للبنك المركزي. بالصين عم لكم بيحطوا تاريخ امتى فيكم تصرفوا ليجبروكم تصرفوا أموالكم. تخيلوا قديش هالشيء صعب.
They need to demonstrate that they've met the legal requirements for getting access to that information. So you'd want to have, similar kinds of privacy protections with respect to a retail central bank digital currency. You can imagine some people, in thinking about that trade-off, preferring a stable coin that's privately issued to a central bank digital currency if they're worried about privacy and they don't trust the government with respect to the privacy rules that are put in place. So those are the kinds of questions people might ask. And then on the wholesale side, could a form of central bank digital currency help with reducing
أحمد طارق، لا كلامي ما رح يأثر بالماركت، القوانين اللي رح تجي هي اللي رح تأثر.
Could it assist with improving efficiency and security in foreign currency transactions? Those are the kinds of use cases people think about in the wholesale world. But we're very, very early in this, Steve. So we're very much in the research and development phase. We're not looking to win the central bank digital currency arms race.
ما بحكي شيء، عم يحكي إنه القوانين بدها تجي لازم ينظموا الأطر تبع تركيز بشكل كثير على العملة الثابتة للبنك المركزي والعملات الثابتة بشكل أساسي. هذا ملخص يخلون لهلا.
And the college students who lost a bundle in crypto, and which made me think, look, there's a cost.
أنس لأنه في مخاطر هلا سيلفر جيت ومخاطر القوانين على الكريبتو ما عم يلعب دائما مع ال S&P 500.
In your speech, you said you can't, regulation needs to be deliberate. It takes time. It responds to real life problems, of which we've had plenty, but thank goodness not 08, 09. But there's a real cost to people from lack of regulatory clarity. And as we know in much clearer terms, because of the bigger platforms and louder voices, there's a cost to institutions.
في كلفة على العالم العادي وعلى الشركات.
The cost of uncertainty, and in particular on the incidence, right, of losses in this space, and the disproportionate impact on marginalized and Black and brown communities in this space?
It's a great question. Well, first of all, let me be clear that the crypto activity that results
أهلا وسهلا من أديلايد.
is not in the banking system.
Not your fault.
So, the banks that we supervise and regulate have pretty limited exposure to crypto-related activity. And we're suggesting that they continue to be careful and cautious.
من ناحية البنوك نحن بنقول لهم يكون عندهم قوانين، يكون عندهم استخدام أو exposure يعني ما يكونوا معرضين للكريبتو إلا بشكل كتير كتير قليل.
That is, offering deposit services. The approach that we're taking is in the context for banks is in the context of the fact that banks in general are being careful and cautious in this space.
البنوك عم بياخذوا احتياطاتهم.
Tailoring our response to the world that we're working in. It doesn't really speak to the question, what's the right role for market regulators with respect to all the activity happening outside.
بس حاليا ما في وضوح عن.
We've seen enormous harm, and as you said,
كيف بيتصرفوا بعالم الكريبتو.
Information about the distributional effects, but at least some of the people who are harmed are people who are, like the students who I met who.
في كتير عالم من اللي خسرت أموالها يمكن يكونوا تلاميذ، يمكن يكونوا من مجتمعات معينة. أهلا وسهلا.
We always had this a trade-off with respect to innovative products. So, abstracting that away from the current set of circumstances, we have this basic trade-off. If you step in too early, you might cut off innovation in a way that
إذا بتتدخل بطريقة سريعة، خايفين نتدخل بطريقة سريعة نوقف التطور ونوديه لمحلات تانية. إذا ما بنتدخل في خسائر، بدنا نلاقي مجال بالنص. الشيء الإيجابي اللي عم لاحظه بالحكي بين باول وبين هذا إنه كلهم عم يحكوا ما بدهم يوقفوا التطور، بدهم يتركوا التطور بالولايات المتحدة، وهذا شيء جيد. يعني بيعترفوا إنه التكنولوجيا لها استخدام حقيقي. هيدا شيء عم بلمسه إنه هيك، بس بدنا القوانين تكون واضحة وما تكون كتير قاسية. هذا اللي بيهمنا، تطلع القوانين بقى لحتى تريح العالم ونبلش نقدر نبني بطريقة جيدة.
And then they just take off and they move very, very quickly, and then they overwhelm individual decision making, they overwhelm risk management functions. They are usually, when they're taking off, extremely lucrative, and they feel safe because everything's going up. And so people get even more excited, and you get a frenzy. And then the cycle turns when
بدنا شيء يا هوبي، بدنا نكون بالنص. مش ضروري نكون ما قسوة مع الدول ولا قسوة مع الحر، لازم يكون في مجال لاثنين. ما في موعد للقوانين، يا ريت بدنا اياهم يتفقوا، بدنا الكونغرس يتدخل، حتى ما جاري جانسلر جاري الوسخ يضلوا يعمل بده اياه.
are the same basic principles we've known about all along. So, calling something crypto doesn't make it immune from the laws of nature or sort of the basic risks that we see in finance. And that's why I said a lot of what we've said so far is kind of motherhood and apple pie, because our basic risk management practices are really useful.
And yes, but there's the Dodd-Frank moment issue, right? Which is that assume, and it's real, I have full confidence in your
وحياة الله هيدا اللي جايبينها لتحاوروا ما مع خبر شيء.
It's a perimeter drawing and coordination issue, right? The fact that something really bad is happening right outside your door to vulnerable people has got to be somebody's problem. And in a way, that is what Dodd-Frank tried to
القوانين رح يتدخل أموال مخيفة. مجرد في وضوح قانوني الشركات الكبيرة كلها، الأموال الكبيرة كلها بتدخل.
That sort of a holistic take.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I said before, I think it would be useful for Congress to have a comprehensive framework here, for the reasons that you described. But in the absence of that comprehensive framework, it's important for
بدهم الكونغرس يتدخل ويعمل أسس وأطر للقوانين. طالما الكونغرس ما عم يتدخل ويعمل هالشي، بدنا عم نستخدم القوانين الموجودة بالأسواق التقليدية. منا ايديال، منا مثالية، ولكن أفضل من ما شيء.
Thank you so much. This has been incredibly enriching and thought-provoking and important. Please join me in thanking Vice Chair Barr for his insights.
مبسوطة بحال. alright. خليني اقول لكم كم شغله لاحظتها انا من شو اسمه. اول شيء القوانين جايين، قلنا ايه ونقلنا لا. القوانين جايه على المجال، هيدا صار شيء معترف فيه وخلص جاي. هيدا ايجابي انا برايي. القوانين بتجي على المجال بتساعد اول شيء لتفويت اموال كبيره. انا بهمني القوانين تجي على المجال، يعني الشركات، الانستتيوشنز، البنوك الكبيره، يعني هول اللي معهم اموال كتير كبيره، وقت تفوت على الاسواق القيمه السوقيه تبع حيالله شيء بيعلى بشكل كتير كبير. يعني انا معه انه يجي القوانين وقت تجي، ولكن بدنا القوانين تكون بطريقه جيده، ما يوقفوا التطور. مش مثل ما جاري جنسلر عم يعمل كل شيء سكيورتي وكل شيء مدري. لا، بدنا قوانين جيدة. القوانين جاية هلا رح يركزوا بالاول على العملات الثابته، والعملات الثابته البنك المركزي رح يطلقون. عم يحكي كان بايجابيه عن هالموضوع، انه ما رح يجبروا السي بي دي سي على المستوى الشخصي، رح يمكن على المستوى الكبير او المدفوعات عابره الدول يمكن يعملوا شيء من هالنوع، ولكن مش على مش على الامور الصغيره. هيدا شيء جيد. على الامور الصغيره رح يكون قال يتركوا البنوك تتصرف، يعني يتركوا مراكز اللي بيقدروا يعملوا عملات ثابته كيف باكسوس وسيركل. هلا اكيد باكسوس اخذها سك على المحكمه، ولكن بغياب القطر اللي كل اللي عم بيقولوا بغياب القطر الكونغرس ما عم تتدخل. مجرد يدخل الكونغرس ويعملوا القانون بيصير في وجهه جيده لهالامر. حاليا عم يتبعوا النظام القديم، والنظام القديم منه ماشي. هيدا كله عجبني اللي عم يحكيه هو وباول كان قبل، انه ما بدهم يوقفوا التطور. يعني بيعترفوا بإفادة الكريبتو واستخدامه. هيدا شيء عن جد كتير لفت لي نظري صرت عم بسمعه. هلا اكيد اول ما يطلعوا القوانين رح يكون في مخاوف، رح يكون في كل هالامور، رح تهبط السوق شوي، ولكن على المدى البعيد هيدا كتير ايجابي. انا برايي ضروري يصير في قوانين واضحه وصريحه للعملات الثابته وللمنصات. دايما بقولها لحتى يحموا المستثمر. ما بدنا المنصات تضلها تشتغل ضدنا، لانه حاليا بالاسواق المنصات شو بتعمل؟ بتشوف عامل لونج وشورت تمشي عكسك لتحرقك. هلا مش عم بقول لك انا عم بحكي بالمجمل. بتشوف العالم تشتغل لانه هدفها تعمل اموال، وهيدا الشيء ما لازم يكون مسموح بشكل عام. هيدا الشيء انا لفت لي نظري. ولكن القوانين جاي، نقلنا ايه ونقلنا لا. وقتها تجي رح تاثر على السوق، والمخاوف اللي بالسوق حاليا اكثرها مخاوف قوانين. هاي المخاوف من القوانين، مخاوف من سيلفر جيت. شو هي مشكلتها قوانين عم يحاربوها كرمال بدهم يسيطروا على الدولار. قوة الأمريكا بالدولار تبعها، بدهم يضلوا مسيطرين على الدولار، وتدفقات الدولار. هيدا كتير مهم. وين بيروح وين بيجي، هيدي الأمور كتير بتهمهم. حدا سألني عن عملات الخصوصية قبل ما لحقت راح المسج. عملات الخصوصية أنا برأيي رح تواجه خطورة. الكريبتو هو كله عن الوضوح صراحة. جمال البيتكوين والكريبتو فيكم تراقبوا حيالله معاملة وين ما تروح، وأنا ما عندي مشكلة بهالأمر. أي معاملة من أي محفظة لأي محفظة وكل هالأمور. عملات الخصوصية ليه عم تستعمل عملات خصوصية لهالدرجة؟ البنوك والدول ما بعتقد رح يحبوها. انا لذلك ماني داخل بولا عملة خصوصية، لأن برأيي رح يتم محاربتها. 1 مليون لايك. عبد الرحمن بشكرك. عبد الرحمن سألتني كيف فيك تتواصل معي على الخاص. في عندي ايميل، في عندي تويتر، في عندي تيليجرام. بالايميل تحت بعت لي ايميل وساعتها بنتواصل على الخاص. انا بعطيك الخاص تبعي اذا بدك. تحليل للسوق. في مخاوف كتير بالأسواق حاليا صراحة. انا عارف انه كان بده، انا اخذت ارباح كتير كبيره وقت وصلنا لل 25 تقريبا. اخذت ارباح، حولت كتير منهم على البيتكوين. كنت دايما عم اقول خدوا ارباح حولوا على البيتكوين، في صعودات لكتير عملات ما كان لازم تصعد قد ما صعدت. عارف في قوانين جايه. انا عملت يلي بيتابع القناه تبعي، انا عملت من فتره، فيكم تفوتوا على البلاي ليست، عملت مقابله مع بالانجليزي اكيد، مقابله مع جاريث سالوي. اذا بتشوفوها، حكينا جاريث سالوي عامل اكثر من مقابله معه، مش اول مقابله. جاريث سالوي يلي ما بيعرف عنده خبره تقريبا شي 25 سنه 30 سنه بوول ستريت، يعني سوق الاموال العالمي بالبورصه بنصدين وول ستريت. عنده خبره جاريث سالوي، وحكينا عن كتير امور. وقال لي القوانين جايه هالسنه. هو برأيه الهبوط الأخير للكريبتو للبيتكوين هو بسبب القوانين، بسبب الوضع العام اللي موجود. لذلك أنا كنت عارف بهالأمر، بهالهبوط اللي توقعته صراحة من 25. أنا متوقع كنت هبوط، ما عم لكم كنت عارفه 100%، بس أنا أكتريات أرباح أخذتها على 25 لأنه عارف كان في معدل 200 جمعة. السوق حاليا بدنا نعرف قد ايه نسبه هلا تاثير سيلفر جيت. امبارح سمعنا عن كريبتو دوت كوم عم بيكون عندها مشكله سيوله بالولايات المتحده. حاليا بنك سيلفر جيت هو كان البنك الاساسي، صله الوصل من العالم التقليدي لعالم الكريبتو. هو كان صله الوصل بين الاسواق التقليديه لعالم الكريبتو. وحاليا لندخل اموال جديده على السوق ضروري نستعمل البنوك، وبيظل جاري جانسلر والطريقه اللي عم يتشدد فيها والبنوك عم تهرب منهم. عندنا هلا سيجنتشر بانك، اذا سيجنتشر بانك صار مشكله عليه، ما في سيوله جديده رح تدخل الولايات المتحده. وقلنا ايه ولا قلنا لا، الولايات المتحده اكبر سوق مالي بالعالم. يعني بغض النظر بتحبوها بتكرهوها، هي الوضع هي اكثر اموال بتفوت على السوق هي من الولايات المتحده. هيدي في يعني في uncertainty بهالناحيه. في المخاوف الثانيه هي من ماونت جوكس مثلا، في عملات كتير بيتكوين بس رح تدخل السوق، اجلوها لشهر 4. بس نفس الوقت رح يكون كميه كبيره من العالم رح تاخد اموال، رح تدخل السوق كان عندها اموال كتير كبيره. يعني معدل، حكيت عن الموضوع قبل، معدل الاشخاص اللي عم ياخدوا من ماونت جوكس حكي عنها كتير. هي منصة احترقت يابانية من تم خرقها من زمان، بدهم يوزعوا تقريبا كميات كبيرة كتير من البيتكوين للعالم. المعدل تبع الأشخاص اللي رح يطلع لهم أرباح هو تقريبا شي $1,000,000 $900,000. هيدا الشيء أكيد رح يأثر بشكل كتير. في مخاوف من هالأمر، حتى لو مش الكل ربحوا باعوا، في كتير عالم قالوا ما رح يبيعوا هلأ، ولكن بغض النظر منهم ما باعوا، هالشي عم يعمل مخاوف بالسوق. وعندك الايث انلوك، الايثيريوم عم يعمل انلوك كمان، في مخاوف بالسوق. يعني في عندنا عدة مخاوف بالسوق عم تدفع السوق هبوطا. لذلك الترند واضح بعده هلا هبوط. هلا اذا كسرنا المركز، صرت حكي عنه كتير، كسرنا هذا هلا انا برايي يمكن في هبوط قوي. انا برايي في بعض هبوط، بدنا ننزل تحت 20,000، بدنا نعمل ريتست تحت 20,000. راي شخصي، منه نصيحه استثماريه، انتم عم تسالوني رايكم. انا رايي بدنا نعمل ريتست تحت. هل رح نكفي نعمل قاع جديد ولا رح نكسر القاع القديم؟ ما فيني لكم بطريقه 100%، إذ حسب القوانين وحسب شو بيصير بالسوق. يعني في امور بتجي ما فيكم تسيطروا عليها، وهذا الوضع الحالي. في كتير uncertainty يعني منه مؤكد، امور منها مؤكده، من القوانين، من البنوك، من الجاري جانسلر، المحاكمات، من الفيدرالي قد ايه بده يزيد الفايده. يعني ها كلها عم بتاثر بالاسواق. يعني اذا شفنا انهيار، يعني العالم عم تتوقع انهيار بالاسواق التقليديه. انهيار بالاسواق التقليديه رح يعطي نتيجه باسواق الكريبتو. قلنا ايه وقلنا لا، لانه العالم بتصير قيمه الدولار تبعها بتشح، وهالامور كلها بتاثر. هذا كل شيء أنا عندي اليوم. بدي الساعة 3 وجه الضوء صارت عندي. خليني روح نام شوي، وبشوفكم بكرة أنا بفيديو جديد وماركت أبديت جديد. إن شاء الله انبسطتوا بهاللايف اللايف شو. والسبت أنا بعمل كل نهار سبت بعمل لايف شو، وبنحكي فينا نحكي عن كل شيء، وبجاوبكم عن أسئلتكم. يعني أكتر بصير جاوب على الأسئلة كلها أنا. يلا انبسطت فيكم، وبشوفكم قريبا.